Welcome back, our lovely listeners, to Research Method Course. I'm Brian. This is my fantastic co-host, Lucy. How you doing, Lucy?
Doing great, Brian, and ready to dive into one of the trickiest parts of any research project,
Oh, yeah.
building that perfect research question, especially in a field as dynamic as TESOL.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It can feel like staring at a blank page, right? You have
Mm,
all these ideas swirling around about English language learning, but turning them into a focused question that you can actually research.
yeah.
That's a skill in itself.
It really is, and a weak research question can make the whole project feel overwhelming or lead to dead ends. So today, we're going to equip you with the tools to not just design a TESOL research question, but to make it one that gets you excited about the process.
Love that. So picture this. You're back in your TESOL program. Maybe you're even working in the field already, and you've got this research project on the horizon. There's a particular study that caught my eye. Using interactive storytelling to teach vocabulary. The question was, how does the use of interactive storytelling impact vocabulary retention among intermediate ESL learners in an online learning environment? I don't know about you, but that already sounds way more interesting than some of the research papers I've slogged through.
It absolutely does. And you know what? That question is not just catchy, it's actually well designed. There are some specific criteria that make a research question strong, especially in TESOL. And as we break down this example, you'll see how they all come into play.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's unpack this. What's the first thing we should be looking for in a strong research question?
The first thing is a specific focus. It sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people get tripped up here. There are three key things to consider. Is it doable in your context? Is the question crystal clear? And do you, as the researcher, have the control to make this study happen?
Okay, I'm starting to see why this gets tricky. Let's take doable first. Does the example about interactive storytelling pass that test?
I think so. Think about your typical TESOL environment. You likely have access to intermediate ESL learners, especially if you're working with online platforms, and interactive storytelling. There are tons of tools and resources out there, many of them free.
So it's not like you need $1 million budget and a team of developers to pull this off.
Exactly. It's feasible within the context most TESOL researchers find themselves in. Now, the second point. Clarity is all about being laser focused. That example question clearly lays out the learning method, interactive storytelling, the specific group we're interested in, intermediate ESL learners, the skill we're measuring, vocabulary retention, and even the setting an online learning environment. No ambiguity there.
That makes sense. If your question is vague, your research is going to be all over the place.
Exactly. And the third point under specific focus is control. Can you, the researcher, actually set up the study and see it through? In this case, yes. If you're the teacher or researcher, you design the lessons, you choose the storytelling platform. You administer the pre and post tests for vocabulary. You're the one calling the shots.
I like it. It's like you're the conductor of this research orchestra.
Yeah.
So our example research question has a specific focus. What's the next criteria we should be looking at?
Scope. This one's all about finding that sweet spot, not too broad, not too narrow. A question that's too broad tries to tackle too much. For example, trying to study the impact of interactive storytelling on all ESL learners, from beginners to advanced across multiple skills like speaking, writing, and EB vocabularies is just too much for one study.
Yeah, you'd be spreading yourself way too thin.
Uh-huh.
But on the flip side, what does a question that's too narrow look like?
Imagine if the question focused on a very specific type of interactive storytelling, maybe using one specific app with a single predetermined story. There's not much room for variation or for drawing broader conclusions.
Ah, I see. So our example question strikes a good balance because it focuses on vocabulary retention, which is measurable, but it allows for flexibility in how the interactive storytelling is implemented.
Right. It's specific enough to give the research direction, but open enough to allow for interesting findings and nuances to emerge. Now let's talk about manageability.
Okay, I'm getting the feeling this is where practicality meets ambition. We've got this great research question, but can we actually pull it off?
Exactly. Think about your time frame. Can this research be done within the limits of, say, a semester or a couple of months if you're already working? This particular study? Absolutely.
That's a relief. What about resources? We touched on this briefly, but it's worth digging deeper.
For sure. Think about what you'd need. Online storytelling platforms are tons of free or affordable options. Materials for the lessons themselves could be things you create, adapt, or even find readily available online. Then there's assessment, pre-tests, post-tests to measure that vocabulary gain. Again, tons of existing resources out there that you can adapt to your needs.
So we're not talking about renting out a fancy lab or anything.
Not at all. And the final piece of manageability is support. Do you have access to enough participants to make the study meaningful? In a TESOL context, this is usually pretty doable. You might be teaching a class already or collaborating with schools or even working with an online learning community. Finding participants is usually not a deal breaker.
Okay, so our example quotient is specific what he says. The scope is just right, and it's manageable within the realities of TESOL research. I'm guessing there's one more big hurdle to clear.
You got it. Researchability. This is all about the data. Can you actually collect the information you need to answer your question? What kind of data will give you the answers you're looking for?
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty. What kind of data would we need to actually see if interactive storytelling is impacting vocabulary retention?
Well, the most obvious is those vocabulary test scores. Pre-test, before the intervention, post-test afterwards. We want to see if there's a significant difference. But remember, we're not just robots looking at numbers. We also want to know how the learners felt about this method. Were they engaged? Did they enjoy it? Did they feel it helped them learn?
So we need a mix of that hard data, the test scores, and some qualitative data, the kind that gives us insights into the learner's experiences. And where would we gather all this information?
We've got a few options, those pre and post tests, of course. But we could also use surveys, maybe even short interviews with some of the learners. And if it's an online environment, there might be data on how they're interacting with the platform, how much time they're spending on tasks, things like that.
So the data is out there.
Yeah.
But can we actually analyze it in a way that gives us a clear answer to our research question?
Absolutely. For the quantitative data, those vocabulary scores, we could use statistical analysis like a paired t-test to see if those scores significantly improved after using the interactive storytelling method. And for the qualitative data from surveys and interviews, we could use a technique called thematic analysis to look for patterns and themes in what the learners are telling us.
This is making me want to go back to school and do some research myself. We've got the data, the methods to analyze it, and it all stems from that one well-crafted research question. But I'm sure our listeners are eager to get to work on their own questions. What's the first step they should take?
I'm glad you asked. Let's shift gears and get you all started on crafting your own research questions. It all begins with brainstorming, and we've got a great activity to guide you through it. All right, time to unleash those brilliant research ideas you've got brewing. Grab a notebook, open a doc on your computer, whatever works for you. We're about to do some brainstorming, and the key here is to let those ideas flow freely. No judging, no censoring, just pure idea generation.
I love that. It's like we're giving ourselves permission to be curious, to explore all those nooks and crannies of the TESOL world. But I know sometimes that blank page can be intimidating. Any tips for getting those brainstorming juices flowing?
Absolutely. Start with your own experiences. Think back to your journey as an English language learner, or if you're already teaching, what are you observing in your classrooms? What are those burning questions that keep popping up?
That's a great starting point. Maybe you're fascinated by the impact of technology on language learning, just like that interactive storytelling example.
Right.
Or perhaps you're intrigued by the role of culture in language acquisition. How do learners from different backgrounds approach learning English?
Exactly. Or maybe you're passionate about creating inclusive learning environments. How can we best support learners with diverse needs and learning styles? Remember, there are no right or wrong answers in brainstorming. Just let those ideas flow.
I can already feel my mind buzzing with possibilities. But I know that at some point we need to start shaping those ideas into something more concrete. What's the next step in this research question journey?
You're right. We need to give those ideas some direction. That's where the aim statement comes in. Think of it as a concise declaration of purpose for your study. It's your research compass guiding you towards our destination.
An aim statement. I like the sound of that.
Mm.
It feels more manageable than trying to tackle a full-blown research question right away.
Exactly. And to help you formulate your aim statement, we've got a few sentence starters to get you going. Feel free to choose whichever one resonates with you or even combine them. Ready?
Hit me with them. I'm ready to give my research purpose.
All right, here they are. You can start by saying, the main aim of this research is, or, this research has several purposes. These are. You can also try, the intent of this research project is to, or, this research focuses on. See how they help frame your purpose.
I do. They're like those fill-in-the-blank templates that make writing a paper so much less daunting. So let's say I'm really interested in exploring how using virtual reality can help ESL learners understand English idioms. My aim statement could be,
The intent of this research project is to explore the effectiveness of using virtual reality in teaching English idioms to ESL learners. See? You've got a clear and concise statement of purpose.
That was surprisingly painless. Now, I'm guessing this aim statement is the bridge that leads us to our actual research question.
You guessed right. And here's the cool part. Often you can simply transform your aim statement into a question format.
Ooh, I love a good transformation. So in this case, my research question could be,
How effective is the use of virtual reality in teaching English idioms to ESL learners? Boom. You've gone from a spark of an idea to a fully formed research question.
that was smooth. Starting to feel like a research question ninja. But before we get too carried away, there's one more crucial step, right? That reality check we talked about earlier.
You're on fire. Yes, we need to put that shiny new research question to the test. We're going to hold it up against those 4 criteria we discussed: specific, focus scope manageability, and researchability. Think of it as a quality control check.
All right, time to put on our critical thinking caps. What are the key questions we should be asking ourselves as we examine our research question?
Let's revisit those criteria one by one. First up, specific focus. Ask yourself, is this question truly doable within my context? If you're working in a school with limited access to technology, a study on virtual reality might not be realistic.
Good point. Sometimes we have to adjust our ambitions to match our circumstances. What about clarity?
Read your research question out loud. Does it clearly state what you're investigating? Is there any room for ambiguity or misinterpretation? Remember, a clear question leads to a clear research path.
Clarity is key. And of course, we need to make sure we have control over the research process.
Exactly. Can you design the study, collect the data, and analyze the results? If there are too many external factors that you can't control, you might need to rethink your question.
Okay, so we've scrutinized our research question for specific focus. What's next on the checklist?
Scope. Take a good look at your research question. Is it trying to cover too much ground? Remember, it's better to focus on a specific area and explore it in depth than to spread yourself too thin.
Right. We don't want to end up with a research project that feels like a never-ending marathon. But on the other hand, we don't want a question that's so narrow that it barely scratches the surface.
Exactly. Make sure your question has enough room for exploration and discovery. You want to be able to draw meaningful conclusions from your research, not just confirm something that's already well known.
Scope check complete. What about manageability? This one feels particularly important, especially if you're juggling research with other commitments.
Absolutely. Time is a precious commodity. Ask yourself, can I realistically complete this research within the time frame I have available? Be honest with yourself. It's better to scale back your ambitions than to set yourself up for failure.
And, of course, we need to think about resources. Do we have access to the materials, the technology, the participants we need to conduct this research effectively?
Yes, don't underestimate the importance of resources. If you need specialized software funding or access to a specific population of learners, make sure you have a plan in place.
Resource check.
Then,
Done. What's the final test our research question needs to pass?
the all-important researchability check. This one's all about the data. Can you actually collect the information you need to answer your question?
Right. We need to make sure the data exists, that we can access it, and that we have the tools and skills to analyze it effectively.
Exactly. Think about what type of data will best answer your question. Will it be quantitative data like test scores or survey results? Or qualitative data like interviews or observations? Or perhaps a mix of both? And once you've identified the data you need, how will you collect it and what methods will you use to analyze it?
This is where things start to get really exciting. We're not just dreaming up research questions. We're actually thinking about how to make them a reality.
I love that energy. And remember, refining your research question is an ongoing process. You might find that you need to tweak it as you dig deeper into the literature or as you start collecting data. That's perfectly normal.
Okay, we've brainstormed, we've crafted an aim statement, we've formulated our research question, and we've put it through the ringer with those 4 key criteria. I'm feeling pretty accomplished right now. What's the next step for our listeners?
Now it's your turn to put all this into practice. We're going to recap those 4 essential criteria one last time. Use them as your guide as you design your own TESOL research question, and when you're ready, share it with us in the comments. We can't wait to see what you come up with. Okay, so before we wrap up, let's do one final recap of those 4 criteria we've been talking about. Those essential elements of a strong research question. You ready?
Ready. Hit me with them one last time.
All right. First up, remember specific focus. We need a question that's doable within your context, right? It's got to be super clear, no room for vagueness, and you as the researcher need to be in the driver's seat.
Right. So no pie-in-the-sky research questions.
Yeah,
Got to stay grounded in reality.
exactly. Then we have scope. Not too broad, not too narrow. It's like Goldilocks finding that perfect porridge.
Yeah.
You want a question that's focused but also allows you to uncover some interesting findings.
Right. You don't want to end up with a research project that takes over your life, but you also don't want to just skim the surface.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's manageability. Think about time, resources, and support. Can you realistically pull this off?
Right. It's great to be ambitious, but you got to be honest with yourself about what you can actually accomplish.
For sure. And last but not least is researchability. Is it actually possible to collect the data you need to answer your question? Can you analyze that data effectively?
Got it. The data is the heart of any good research project. So there you have it, folks, our 4 research question commandments. Specific focus, scope, manageability, and researchability. Keep those in mind as you brainstorm your own research questions for your TESOL projects.
And don't forget, once you've crafted your question, we want to hear it. Share it with us in the comments. We're so excited to see what you all come up with.
Yeah, share those questions and let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, happy researching, everyone.
Happy researching.